Alrighty everyone, hello, and welcome back to another episode of my nonsense, in which I am on spring break from teaching and all that, and so just can't be asked to get up and look all pretty just to sit in my house this time, you know what I mean? I would rather sleep the extra couple hours than do all of that. Not gonna lie though, like, as fun as teaching is, having to wake up at 5 in the morning so I can get my ass together and get to campus and all that other shit for like 2 hours before class starts so I can actually make sure I get a parking spot. It's a lot, but it is fun and it's going very well and I'm very excited about that. I do have to put on a little bit of makeup tomorrow though, so I can kind of get a sense of what my wedding dress is going to look like once I have the full face going on. Can't wait to drop all of those photos and videos and whatever else, but you know. Today though, we are here to talk about this book here, The Darkening Age, The Christian Destruction of the Classical World by Nixey, which was something that one of my patrons, Patsy, was very kind to have sent to me. For those of you who don't know, I actually do have like a public Amazon wish list that I kind of add books to every now and then, and sometimes kind people, they do go ahead and buy me a little gift off of that, and I like to read the books and then tell you all about what I found in the books and like what I think about them, so that you know if this is something that would be worth your own time as well. And it's just kind of like a fun symbiotic relationship, right? You offer me book, I offer you knowledge, thoughts, and connections to everything else going on. And if what you would want me to read or check out is not on the wish list, I do have a post office box right here that you can also send things to, be it, I don't know, gifts or art or whatever else you want. This is just public post office that is not my home address. So that's there for anyone who wants to send things that maybe aren't on that list. If you want it. If you do, all my love and appreciation to you.
You made a mistake. It's okay now. It's not gonna go on the video. Don't make it be on the video. That'd be bad.
All this aside though, hello. If you are new here, then welcome. My name is Sara Streisand. I am a Christian witch, a content creator, a writer, an educator, all the kinds of things. Specifically also a writer of this book right here, which if you heard the term Christian witch and you said, how? Then don't worry. This book is pretty much the one-stop shop that tells you exactly how we understand the term witchcraft, how it has evolved over time, what the actual biblical verses that I don't doubt you're all Googling right now actually say about the subject, and so on and so on and so on. It is literally just the opening of the door to a very wacky, wonky world of mystic fun and esoteric happenings under a Christian lens. So if you like all that kind of stuff, definitely do hit the subscribe button, like the video, ring the bell, all that good stuff. And also, if you are not new here, you're coming back, welcome back. Thank you so much for sticking around with me. Also remember that if anyone watching here wants to get these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, you can always hop over to my Patreon and subscribe to one of the video tiers so that you can get these videos early on and also get like a little sneak preview of what I'm actually going to be doing each week as well. All kinds of fun stuff on there, so definitely check it out. But anyway, now let us get into a little bit of a discussion of this here book and the thoughts within it. As you can see, I've done many tabs in here. For me, tabs are kind of like a physical, like, Control F. Like in a PDF or something, it'd be very easy for me to just kind of find the word or the section that I'm looking for. So oftentimes, even though I have the physical books, like, you know, misquoting Jesus, even though I have them physically, I will usually also like to get like some kind of digital copy so that I can do that, which saved my life writing Discovering Christian Witchcraft, because I knew I read something that I wanted to include in Discovering Christian Witchcraft, could not find it no matter how much time I spent flipping through this, because I misremembered what page it was on. So, that's why you'll always, when I get into books that I plan to use in future things, you'll always see all of this. And to give you a bit of an idea of what kind of stuff you will find in this book, some of these tabs say things like insane hypocrisy, sorcery as pretext to fuckery, Eusebius coping about Constantine, made up rules, disparity between priests and actual attitudes of people, a sad quote, Catholic Church book burning, Ovid versus Genesis creation myth, Jesus as sorcerer, Christian victim complex, and a whole lot more. However, to give an overview of the book, because I can't just sit here and read to you word for word all these things, hopefully the things I titled my tabs will give you a little bit of a snapshot of the kind of shit that's in here. But what I found in this book was a really well-written expose of a side of history that most people do not take the time to look at, mostly because that would be pretty damaging to the long-standing belief that Christianity was this poor underdog religion that struggled and persevered and managed to make everything good and holy and all was rainbows and sparkles forever after. Here's the thing about this book too. It's not just written like, it's not just written in this kind of dry, just tell it as it is fashion like Christians as the Romans saw them by Robert Louis Wilkin. It doesn't take that kind of still trying to be neutral despite displaying the first-hand accounts of people kind of tone. This is written almost like a story in that you can really viscerally see the images. Like, Nixey does a great job with the narrative style, with the prose itself, really putting you in that scene and highlighting those emotional undercurrents, highlighting the difficulty for, pre-Christian Romans and Greeks trying to navigate this rapidly changing world. So in that regard, it was very easy to read. Like, I love Wilkin's work. It's really, really good also, and it shares a lot of the things that were in this book, which is relevant for later, but it was just very hard to get through because it was really dry. This was very easy to kind of read, to the point that at one point I kind of wanted to just read and not really have pen in hand or highlighter in hand so much, so you know what I mean? But overall, it really is a seriously disheartening view of Christianity, right? And this is definitely a book you want to read if you want to get the other side of the story. Again, right, we have this idea of Christianity as this underdog religion where there were tons of martyrs and they were so persecuted and everything was really bad, but then eventually, like, the hearts of the people just magically started to turn around by the grace of God, and the whole empire just became Christian and all was well, and we did away with these old superstitions and we progressed and grew as people. But this book points out how that is actually not necessarily the case. In fact, what this book goes over, again, as you might have guessed from some of my tabs, is just how deadly and dangerous a lot of the proponents for Christianity could have been. There is mention of the great mathematician and philosopher Hypatia and how it was that she came to her really awful, brutal end at the hands of a Christian mob. There is many detailed descriptions of how Christians would tear down statues, rub their faces off, like mark crosses into the statues, just tear down temples, burn things like the Library of Alexandria and all these other things, as well as like primary accounts of people writing down how Christians were not these holy rollers, these great saintly men, but seemed to be more of just thugs and hooligans looking for a good reason to destroy and loot these very proud and well-decorated temples. Very different point of view here, as you might imagine. It also shows that Christianity is a bit of, if not a large reason why the Dark Ages went on, right? So the Dark Ages, or, that medieval period, is kind of like directly after the end of the Roman Empire, around like between 400 and 600 CE. And that's, I don't think coincidentally, the time that emperors and other leaders like Theodosius started popping up and really going like balls to the wall about making sure the entire empire was Christian, to the point that, and I couldn't believe this as I was reading it, but a certain philosopher, ancient philosopher Epicurus, had actually kind of made something of the Epicurean theory of atoms like thousands of years ago. He sat down and said, well, hold on, what if maybe it's not gods that cause storms or all these other calamities, but what if all of nature is just made up of these tiny little invisible particles that just kind of have their own way of existing and we just don't understand them enough yet, right? Like, what if these things are just doing what they do and therefore there's no reason to sacrifice to gods anymore or to think that it's divine anything causing this, but instead just the very nature of the world that we live in? I'll give you 3 guesses as to who really didn't like that. which group really wasn't like the biggest fan of that. Specifically, actually, this book talks about how St. Augustine really fucking hated that theory, because if we followed that theory, that means that God would just not exist, and therefore neither would hell, and then no one would be afraid anymore of the torments and punishments of hell, and would just go ahead and act however they wanted to. Setting the stage early for that, if you're not religious, why don't you kill people, fuck shit argument. But I can only think of how abysmal it is that Epicurus had that theory thousands of years ago, got written off for it, most of his writings burned, to the fact that we barely could even cobble together such a theory or even know that it exists, because Christians really like to burn anything that disagreed with them, their philosophy, and their religious setup. But also that here we are 2,000 years later showing that actually, yeah, he was on the right track, because atoms and molecules do exist, and they do have specific functions and things that they do that we can study and that we can look at. Imagine how much farther as a species we could be, okay, if we didn't take all of the pagan learning and pagan philosophy that the Christians took and threw the fuck out. I'm just saying. But, so to that end, we discover a lot of the, first-hand accounts of people like Celsus, like Porphyry, like all of these other writers who took note of this rising band of Christians and said, what the hell is that? What's going on? And, again, as I was reading this, there was a lot of stuff I had already recognized from Wilkins' work, which is a very more neutral approach, just like here's what they said and here's what they thought. This very much kind of like dramatized it a little bit, played it up a little bit, and also dug deeper into these many criticisms and ideas as well. It has a lot of really interesting, illustrations, a lot of really fantastic sources, so many primary sources, which is really very good. And it shows that this rosy image so many, especially in the church history, have of Christianity is really not it. Which brings us into our next section about the criticisms against this book. So as I was showing this book off a little bit on TikTok, someone was like, well, don't get too confident in that book, and posted a link to a certain page called History for Atheists, which really goes balls to the wall defending this, and which usually in my experience with these kinds of people is code for claims he's an atheist, actually isn't. I've seen this many times. I've seen people who claim to be Norse pagans tell me that I'm going to hell for being a witch, just to, within 5 minutes, become a fucking Orthodox Christian, if they ever became and were not just always one, but whatever. But as I read this blog, all I could say was, the whole thing might as well have been called, I missed the point, here's me missing the point, for an entire, 2,000 words. Okay? So this blog and the critics, the historians that this writer's pulling from, claim that this is an ahistorical, heavily biased, polemic view of Christianity, that it is, not at all gracious to the realities of Christian life, or, the good that Christianity did, and all these other kinds of things. And according to some folks that he quotes, this historian Roach, Roach says that, it is hard not to detect a degree of anti-Christian animus, which is very silly, because over and over and over again in this book, Catherine, who has a Christian background herself, will point out, over and over, she's like, I'm not here to bash Christians. Every chunk of pages, she'll be like, hey, I'm not trying to bash Christians, they sure did do a lot of good, and blah, blah, blah. She says that continuously. But the point of her book is not to talk about how good Christianity is, because that has been the focus of every fucking book about Christianity since they became the dominant cultural power. They'll be like, well, obviously it's not true that Christians destroyed everything, or we wouldn't have all of these things from, antiquity and pre-Christian era. Sure. But the fact is that they did destroy a lot. They destroyed a ton of stuff. And what we have is a fraction of what we could have had they not done that. There are definitely times that I will give them this, that there are certain angles of Christianity given that just don't line up with the reality of Christianity as a whole, or just all of Christendom. And times like that include when Nixey's talking about, proper Christian values in the eyes of monks. Monks were not the majority of the population. So when monks are out here like, you're not allowed to eat more than a heel of bread or drink a sip of water, and you have to just wear sackcloth and be really sad all the time and blah, 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 blah. That's like monks. That isn't like the majority, again, of Christendom, because we know over time how much Christians, people, just peasant folk, love to party, love to celebrate, love to have a good time, love to feast, love to enjoy their harvest, love to do all this kind of stuff, right? Like, sure, piety is great, but if you're going to look to the words of mystics and people in convents, monks and nuns as your center point for what Christianity was like on the everyday stage, you're not going to get an accurate picture. You're just not. Like, there's a reason that these people were balls to the wall dedicated to this lifestyle, and that most people were just kind of fucking around, milking their cows, and generally having a decent time. And funny enough, a lot of what is described in here about the attitudes of monks, both Nixey and myself picked up on as the signs of deep mental illness. Like, Nixey calls it depression, right? Because a lot of these monks were super isolated. They would cry all the time. They would talk about these kinds of things. More than that, a lot of these steps that these monks would do, I also, as someone with my own kind of anxiety, OCD struggles, recognized implicitly in here. I said, oh, that's religious-based OCD, which would actually, yeah, it turns out this is where we first ever saw signs of the condition of OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. It was in these religious folks who were so dedicated to doing all of these steps exactly so for their salvation. It was known as religious scruples, and it was very damaging to the people who thought that it was a godly way to live, when in fact it was just a continuous feeding of very, very bad and destructive mental illness. But all that to say, yeah, people who claim that this is unbiased are like literally just missing the entire point of the book. The point of the book is to show that vitriolic side, is to give some voice to the people who had their writings burned, who had, their ideas thrown out, who they themselves were chased out of town as Christianity rose to power. Obviously, people who had these experiences are not going to, greet Christianity with hugs and flowers and roses. They're going to have a very, very negative view of Christianity. But when we have a world that is so positively geared towards Christianity because the church was the one in charge of what was written and what was disseminated, that's important to have, right? Adding that really negative view takes all this positivity and balances it back out. So now we can see both sides of the story. Like, that's the fucking point. I don't know how anyone could miss that and be like, but you didn't talk about how good Christianity was. No shit. You want to know about that? Go pick up any book written by a Christian historian. That's like complaining that Howard Zinn has a really cynical view of U.S. history, as if you can't get the most freaking, Yankee Doodle patriotic bullshit from the very standard U.S. history book that students are taught with. All that aside, I didn't take a lot of stock in the criticisms also because, again, the stuff I was reading in this book had already been backed up by other sources that I had read, right? Like, and moreover, again, these aren't just like, oh, we think that the Greeks said this. We have some of the letters of people like Porphyry, of Pliny the Elder, of all these other people. Like, we have them. We have enough of them. And to the point that even the most vitriolic people, like Celsus, even though their writings were burned and we don't really know what the exact words are, we know about what they said because people like Church Father Origen in his Contra Celsus went so fucking hard trying to refute Celsus that he basically quoted every single line of what Celsus said, and so he could cobble together what Celsus was saying about Christianity through that. And it was very fucking nasty. That doesn't mean that Nixey is out here making the Romans themselves look like angels. There were definitely times where I believe it was Celsus that would, as a party trick, go ahead and remove the fucking voice box of a living pig so it couldn't squeal in pain anymore. The Romans, especially of high-class society, were in their own special way very fucked up. Don't get me wrong, and Nixey doesn't get it wrong either. There's no real fucking heroes in this story. But what there is a marked shift in the very fabric of society. And it's a shift that we actually, ironically, are seeing happen right now again in not only America, but across the world stage. So, one of the biggest takeaways I had in this book was that, in fact, a lot of the early Christians, many of the early Christians, in fact, maybe most of the early Christians, were of a class of the lowest of society. Women, slaves, deeply uneducated people, poor people. Like, they were the ones who heard this message of salvation, of hope, of equality, no matter our stations, how we are all one in Christ Jesus, and they clung onto that idea so very deeply. They really were enlightened, emboldened, heartened by this message, and there's really nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong at all with these oppressed peoples who, because of the circumstances of their birth, because of, the systematic injustices and messy institutions of the day, just could not get to these highfalutin high thinkers like Celsus and all these other ones who did have their fancy Roman education, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing people take for granted is that these Roman citizens, these Gentiles who took up this message, were still Roman citizens, were still Gentiles, and therefore were still culturally in line with a lot of these pre-Christian Roman values. This is important because when we think about Christianity and the evolution of it, we can see very clearly how Christianity, the philosophy of it, the theology of it, was so deeply, deeply informed by Greek and Roman philosophy and higher ways of thinking. Like, of course, in a time where the value of a religion was more or less dictated by how old and ancient it was and how peopled it was, in which, even though the Roman Empire really didn't have a lot of love for Jewish people, they still had at least halfway respect for Jewish religion. This new religion that Jewish people were saying is just some bullshit nonsense that has nothing to do with them, and therefore seems to have absolutely no root, rhyme, or reason anywhere, is one that had to make its case in the framework of, pre-Christian Greek and Roman rhetoric. So you'll see a lot of Neoplatonism in the philosophy of folks like St. Gregory of Nyssa, or, other such mystic ways of trying to tangle out these things. You'll see St. Augustine try again and again and again to make logical arguments with these philosophical systems of his day to get Gentile thinkers on board, especially the more influential, educated, and wealthy ones. The highly educated class of Rome, and Nixey points this out too, weren't even super keen about their own religion so much. They were more about the traditions and the culture and the history of it all, following the ways of their forefathers, than the actual religiosity of itself. A lot of these very, very wealthy Roman senators and such, they went through the motions, but they weren't as deeply religious as the average peasant person who wasn't highly educated, who didn't have a lot to fall back on except the hope that some divine power would help them not die or go without and suffer. But the consequence of that, and we see it in this book so often, is that these folks, these uneducated folks who vastly outnumber the elites of Roman society, would become so emboldened to the point of becoming violent mobs, of becoming those very hooligans and thieves that would go run into temples, tear everything down, steal all the gold, and run. We find out actually in here why clerics are always known for carrying a club or a blunt object and not a sword. It's because they misunderstood the point of the gospel when Jesus says to Peter, "Sheath your sword." That's just a part of the gospel narrative, but they took it to mean that no one ever should have a sharp blade as a weapon, so they went instead to go pick up sticks and clubs and beat people to death with those when they fucking talked against Christianity instead. It was a loophole to a problem, to a commandment that didn't actually really exist, because these people didn't know how to really read or understand the gospel. They just had it kind of dictated to them and just kind of ran with it. The rise of Christianity at this point was less about, hey, my ideas are this, my God is this, hear it and be moved and join us, and more, you will join us, or you will be met with violence, or you will be met with suppression. And once the Christian emperor thing started going on from Constantine on, then it became more of a legal thing to do that, which was very much an affront to Roman religion or Roman values. because they, like many other cultures at the time, didn't have an idea of conversion like we do now. They had an idea that, okay, sure, go ahead and love your Jesus. Just worship him alongside everyone else like we've been doing for centuries, absorbing the gods of other cultures. What's the problem? Christians had a big problem, and that is that they claimed that all of these other gods were actually just false idols and evil spirits out to pollute Christianity and Christian people, and they all needed to go. And so that's why they would do this thing with the rubbing faces off, carving crosses in, because it was thought that if you destroyed the face, you freed whatever spirit was trapped in the stone. So all of these statues of gods came tumbling down. We get a very visceral description of a statue of Athena just getting absolutely decapitated and toppled. And it's just, it's a shame. It's a shame to see so much culture and history lost to these people that decided suddenly out of nowhere that their way was actually the better way. And again, they were Roman Gentiles under Roman values. And I tell you now, that's another thing that comes up in here, is being able to subjugate or understand enough to subjugate the religion of your enemies is to subjugate your enemies. This was a value of conquest. This was a value that the empire had employed various times before. Hell, I mean, the Roman Empire didn't only try to quash down Christianity at one point, it tried to quash down the cult of Isis and everything else. This is just basically, once again, a reminder that no religion is made or developed in a vacuum, and that a lot of the horrible things we can see as a result of, the rise of Christianity aren't just because they're Christians so much as it is also because they are Romans, and this was the Roman thing to do when you wanted to win a military conquest and take over and assert your power. But when I say that this is very parallel to today, I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Right now in America, and really also across the world, we have this kind of rise of conservatism, but specifically in America, that comes paired with a rise of Christian nationalism, or as some people are calling it, Christo-fascism. And the people who are holding on tightest to these old school conservative Christian values, I don't think are coincidentally the same people who tend to be from places where the quality of education is not so fucking high. Like, as a Christian myself, that sucks to say, but I do know that the more educated and the more open and the more historied people's way of thinking is, the more different people they've met, the more new cultures and languages and ideas they've come in contact with while managing to maintain the integrity of their own beliefs, the less they're willing to do stupid shit. The more they're willing to tolerate others, the more they're willing to accept others, the more they're willing to be able to hold ideas in tension, right? The idea that, okay, well, what I believe is my truth, and you can believe what you believe, and that does not threaten my truth, right? Whereas back in this time that is being chronicled, and also today, the people championing Christianity, the artists, tend to be ones who do believe that any other beliefs existing are an active threat to their beliefs. In fact, the biggest place you actually see this, ironically, is in institutions of higher learning. So, like, I've seen multiple different blogs and different posts of people kind of giving advice to Christian students of how to stay Christian in a secular university. And they'll say some funny shit, like this one blog here. He doesn't say that people shouldn't go to school, because obviously, we need lawyers and doctors and all these things. And according to him, we need specifically Christian ones for some reason, but we need more of those all around. He does say that, well, these schools are only using liberal Christian scholars and not conservative ones, and that's very bad because, Bart D. Ehrman, he's just such a lib scholar. You can't trust everything he says. You can trust, however, these dogshit apologists who just continue to rehash the same shitty ideas, like this Joe whatever the fuck of this book I'm reading right now, which I will be talking about at a future date because this guy is a fucking menace. But anyway, these conservative scholars are of course the ones repeating the same tired old bullshit about how women need to submit and blah 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 blah, and just kind of like, ignoring the new stuff we continue to discover about this religion or anyone that fucking practiced it early on. Moreover, then we've got a post from Phoenix Seminary about, 3 ways to, not lose your faith at a secular university, and goes on to say shit like this. Unfortunately, in the last several decades, maybe even 50 years, universities have become more ideologically driven, and they're not interested in all ideas. College professors, and therefore classrooms, have become intellectually homogenous. People who are intellectually homogenous tend to hire others who think just like they do. These days, it's very difficult to get hired at a secular university while professing evangelical Christian ideas. Which is kind of like, I don't know, man, maybe these evangelical Christian ideas are not conducive to a fucking university where people from all over the world, from all different communities and faith practices are coming together. I mean, like, by all means, go hold your religious ideas. If you don't believe that gay marriage is, like, good, by all means, don't get into a gay marriage. But the thing that they miss is that them being told that they have to live in a world where people who don't think that can have the freedom to act how they choose is some kind of fucking oppression, and it's not. It's not that you are getting barred for having these ideas, it's that you are going out here uncritically parroting this shit and insisting to people of all walks of life that they should not have the same rights as you. Like, that's, like, it doesn't fucking matter how you paint that. If you go out and say, yeah, I don't think that you should be able to get married like I can get married, people aren't gonna like that, because obviously that's not a fucking big conspiracy of liberal education. That's just basic, whatever. But in this, it's really funny because he admits that Christian parents have this fucking, this proclivity to shelter their Christian children from non-Christian ideas. To think that, well, you know, no, we can't let our kids watch secular media and listen to secular music because then they'll be worldly and they won't be Christian anymore. Much like the early Christians of this day did when they decided that they didn't want to read pagan philosophy. They didn't want their kids to be taught by pagan teachers, and so on and so on and so on. Every time you see Christians whine about pagan philosophy and pagan whatever the fuck in this book, replace that word with secular, and it is directly transferable to modern day. To which I had the thought, while reading this book, and while looking into this in the modern era, I had this thought. I said, if your ideas are truly so good and true and right, and people should follow them, shouldn't they be able to stand on their own without you having to nix your ideological competition? I'm just saying. No one told me to be Christian or die. I'm still Christian because I decided that this is true and right and good for me. But then again, I also do like all them liberal Christian scholars who say things like, oh, hey, maybe Paul didn't mean that women are supposed to just be, you know, fucking cum rags for their husbands. Whatever. Then we got this Philip Goon who kind of pulled this 9 out of 10 statistic entirely from his ass. But he says things like 9 young men and women out of 10 who will receive their degrees this June would probably admit, if they were called to testify, that education has acted as a poison to their faith. In many instances, the virus generated by the reasoning processes induces only mild distemper of skepticism, but in others it works like an acid, eating its way into the bump of credulity until in the end this estimable organ is completely corroded. Alright, Shakespeare, slow the fuck down. But the language they use, the virus of the reasoning process, this corrosive thing, pretty much admitting that education destroys faith. Why does it destroy faith? It didn't destroy mine. That's for fucking sure. So why does it destroy their faith? Because they weren't valuing education to begin with. Because they wanted you to believe one very specific way, whether or not it's backed up by actual scholarship. Because if you got actual scholarship in your hand, you'd have to realize that yes, faith is in fact based on faith, that there is no concrete, universal, 100% proven true sense that Christianity is the way to go, that is the point of faith. Remember we were talking about deconstruction and how that one poor little dipshit was like, I don't want my faith to be based on faith anymore, because these people are lied to and told that faith is truth and knowledge and proof, undeniable, objective fact, and not the trust in the belief system that faith is. These people want to be oppressed so fucking bad. They want to act like, it's some liberal agenda, and not just the fact that these ideas are no longer conducive to a, ironically, very ideologically non-homogenous society. A religiously non-homogenous society. A racially and, just fucking culturally non-homogenous society. When you have a world, a country, where everyone has different ideas, different thoughts, different religions, different outlooks on the world, you can't sit here and fucking insist that it's some great persecution that your one way of living is not being held as the standard for everyone anymore. It's like a Hindu claiming persecution because they can't force the entire of America to stop eating double bacon cheeseburgers. Thankfully, some people are smart enough to understand that you can be religious and not be an idiot, that like being religious and being stupid are not synonymous. And those people are ones like Dr. Paul Thomas, who was a teacher who grew up in the South, who saw how religion was kind of used as a beating stick and how ideas were forced on people, to the point that when he decided to kind of try and be a hero, to be a teacher himself, and to hold students' hands through the process of coming to their own ideas and their own conclusions, when he didn't just spit out the same canned answers that everyone was expected to believe, people accused him of indoctrinating kids. They accused him of pushing an agenda when his only agenda was to get kids to grow their own ideas instead of just being shoved into the thinking of their parents and their grandparents and their communities and their congregations. He says, of course, those most adamant that I was indoctrinating were the most fundamentalist people in town who were terrified of a diversity of ideas, who were the first to try to ban books, who were convinced of their own certainty in a way that was terrifying. So all this bullshit about, oh, you can't really get hired in a university if you have traditional evangelical Christian ideas. Well, no. I mean, you could, as long as you weren't shoving them on people. But as will be a common theme with these kinds of people, every accusation is a confession. Every accusation is a confession. And just like back in antiquity, when these people didn't want anything pagan to pop up, when they wanted to just scrub all trace of it from the earth, despite the fact that there was some really good stuff in there, like the Epicurean theory of atoms, these people today, they'll claim that you're indoctrinating, that it's all liberal woke mind virus, that it's all just, liberal agenda being pushed on everyone. And not the fact that they are so desperately trying to hold on to a hegemony in society they never should have had. A hegemony that stems from all of this. And so when people say that this book is so heavily biased, they fail to consider that maybe the view of Christianity we've always had has also been inherently biased. It's impossible for it not to be. But because we have taken that for granted, because that is what has been sold to us as bona fide objective truth over and over and over again, once we get a book that tells us something that flies in the face of that, we decry this as indoctrination, this as biased, as polemic views, as just a nasty attack on Christianity, and not just setting the record straight after centuries of blowing smoke up Christianity's ass. And now again, is it really that liberalism and liberal ideas are infecting everyone, or is it maybe just that the liberal idea of let everyone do their own thing in peace and harmony, make it so that everyone can do what they wish according to their own personal belief, be it have a gay marriage or a straight marriage or whatever the fuck else you want, is just the way in which you can lower that lowest common denominator so that everyone can live the life that is true for them. The idea that these people are not allowed to push their idea of truth on everyone just seems intolerable to them, as it has always. This is a long, centuries-old tradition of Christians insisting that their way is the only way and that everyone who disagrees should fucking die. So, well... And he also points out that books are a gateway to ideas, which I love that he said, because as a writer myself, as someone who not only writes academic works but also fantasy works, that's really important to me. Yes, when you read books written by people from different backgrounds who are drawing on different mythologies and different cultural systems, you learn a lot. And in fact, all this bullshit about how liberal education is so bad, well, not for nothing, I really got to most viscerally understand an African American point of view, which again, as a white person, I still don't really understand, but I got to see more of it when I took courses that were based on African American literature and which were based on, reading the historical records of people like Frederick Douglass, right? Reading his Independence Day address and the fire he had when he was saying, "How dare you ask me to give an address about freedom and independence while so many of my own are still enslaved right now, this moment." You have to read from the perspective of other people to ever have a chance of truly understanding other people. And these folks who want their way to be the only way know that if that happens, that they will never be able to win the ideology war, because when you posit your way as the only way and cut off all these other experiences, all these other voices, when you throw out all this history to try and make it seem like your way is the best way and always was, obviously people whose experiences don't match up with that are going to say something, just like the people written about in this book did. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church managed to press down a lot of that. And so it's thanks to people like Nixey to be like, you know what? Let's give a platform to the other side so we can see what's really going on here, that give us this more balanced point of view. Again, I've said it once and I'll say it once more here. If your ideas are so good and so true and so great and so awesome and so perfect, and everyone, if enlightened to them, would immediately snap them up and do them, you don't need to kill people to convince them of that. You don't need to erase or burn the writings of your opposition. You don't need to ban certain books or ideas. You don't need to, start whole-ass culture wars about it or push back on the liberal mind virus. You just need to let your ideas stand. And the people that attract them, and the people that those ideas attract will go find them. And the people that those ideas repel will be repelled. And that's all there is to it. And another place that we are starting to see, again, this Christo-fascism, this Christian nationalism pop up, is in these couple posts I've come across in the past couple days. So first, right, I made a little bit of a video about this earlier on TikTok that I also posted here, but at one point, this mob of 40 people rolled up to a metaphysical store in Orlando, Florida. And it's, Spiral Circle bookstore. They're just a little metaphysical shop with their books and their tarot cards and everything else, with a very kind of hippy-dippy vibe to them. Nothing wrong with that. Just doing their thing and minding their business. And that's why it's all the more egregious that a group of 40 people would, with no cognizance, come at night to a place of business to have a conversation about the word and to just start singing and doing whatever outside on the lawn, with the express purpose of trying to convert this woman to Christianity. And that, in her later videos, she will point out that's what they were trying to do. They really thought that they would convert her right there that minute, like they allegedly did a different bodega down the road that has since shut down. Now, all I can wonder is, did that person who shut their store down really convert, or were they just terrified of the results of a mob of 40 fucking people they don't know rolling up to their doorstep? Because I saw that happen, and all I could think about was this book. All I could think about was the same kind of destructive people who would so boldly go and destroy things that aren't theirs just to prove the supremacy and superiority of their beliefs. And of course, this situation now didn't devolve into such horrible things, right? Like, they just kind of were recording a little bit, and, when the store owner said, hey, you can't record here, it's private property, can you please leave? All was handled-ish after that, right? There was no altercation, there was no nothing. But anyone watching that original video knew that it very well could have become an altercation. Moreover, the leader of that 40-person posse went posting video after video after video about this shop owner, how she has demons, how she, she's only angry at them because they showed her the true Jesus and not the fake one she's worshiping, even though she wasn't angry at all and really didn't say anything that wasn't perfectly polite. But just like with Hypatia, how these people started mumbling to themselves about demons and this and that and up and down, I saw again this very irresponsible cult leader go and put that same kind of rhetoric out.
Why did this witch get so mad at us?
One power, the highest power, Jesus Christ.
I'm not open to having a conversation.
Can I just ask you why?
She went viral for recording us worship Jesus. Why did our worship offend her if she loves Jesus or believes in Jesus? Because when the real Jesus shows up, demons manifest and react.
And unfortunately, even if him and his group don't intend any harm to this person, physically anyway, there are people who would see this and who would kind of get an idea in their fucking head to do something terrible. Just like how when, that cute little, they're eating the dogs, eating the cats nonsense happened during the presidential debates. Sure, no one said to go do anything harmful or bad, but that didn't stop many refugee shelters, immigrant centers of Haitian immigrants to suddenly be inundated with bomb threats. These things are called dog whistles. They are little calls to action that no one at the time can recognize or pin. You can't say I said to do anything, because I didn't. I didn't say to go hurt anyone, but the undertext, the undertone told, like little fucking KGB sleeper agents, these people to go start doing terrible shit. Likewise, then I saw this post, which I hope to God is not true and is just some bullshit on Facebook, but if it is, that's all the more concerning, because this is exactly what I'm talking about now, where now people are starting to get confrontational and aggressive, and while sure, right now, this minute, there has been no physical violence, there has been no actual harm done to a body, a person, this rhetoric of thou shalt not suffer a witch to live as a reason to do this implies that one day someone somewhere may very well take that a little bit more to heart. And that's horrific. This is terrible that these people would go ahead and try and infiltrate the religious groups, temples, meetings, gatherings of people who are not them, and then use threats of violence or threats of hellfire to intimidate them out of their own beliefs. It really is like the vibe of early Christians has never fucking left. Like some kind of grip on people's minds. It really does seem like when you are, unfortunately, when you are uneducated and also religious at the same time, shit can go a little bit awry. You can be very easily misled into doing all kinds of stupid shit that you have no business doing if you are actually understanding of anything that your religion has to say. But all in all, this book was really, really good. I really, really liked it. It was very, very, very informative and written in such an easy to digest way. So if you want to know more of that other side and read this for yourself, definitely check it out. And thanks again to Patsy for letting me see it. So I'll see you guys next time for some more good chats. We got a lot to talk about. Oh my goodness. And I will go enjoy myself on this Virgo blood moon to go do a little bit of ritualizing to get some old shit out of my spiritual life. So with all that said, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.